My name is Ray Kolcheski. I work for Spectrum Building Services as a mold estimator, and I'm here to tell you today a little bit about floods and mold. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about Spectrum. We're a 25-year-old Canadian owned and operated company, and we specialize in everything from mold remediations to flood to carpet cleaning. We service about 800 buildings in the Greater Toronto Area, and as well as every major hotel, including the Shangri-La, the Marriott, and for better or worse, the Trump Hotel. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk today about emergency services like floods, how to prevent them, what to do in the event of a flood, and we're also going to talk about mold inside of living spaces. So we're going to talk about how to prevent it and how to identify it and remove it safely. So the F word, yes, floods. What to do in the case of a flood and how to prevent it. There are two facts that you should know about floods. One is that they happen at the most inconvenient times. Most floods occur on a Friday between about 5 o'clock to Sunday at about midnight. And the second fact that you should know is that most floods are fully preventable, meaning that they don't have to occur. So what I'm going to tell you today is how to prevent floods inside of a condominium or an apartment building to help better manage the building. First of all, some major causes of floods are going to be things like toilet overflows. You're also going to have HVAC floods like fan coil leaks, machine wash hoses, as well as balcony or roof leaks. And those will typically occur in townhouse situations. By maintaining all of these situations, we can eliminate most of the floods that occur in any sort of shared living facility. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that you only use approved contractors inside of a condominium or apartment building. For example, a plumber who is familiar with the plumbing inside of a bungalow is not necessarily going to be able to work inside of a 50-story high-rise effectively. The plumbing is different, and therefore there's more likely to cause a flood should a plumber be in there. Also, things like appliance technicians. As I mentioned before, dishwasher hoses are one of the most common causes of floods. So you want to make sure that you have only certified appliance technicians inside of any building that you're managing. Maintenance, and more maintenance is essential when it comes to preventing floods. You're going to want to make sure that you inspect any washing machine hoses or toilet hoses in order to prevent them. Over time, these kinds of hoses will become cracked or porous. Most of them are made out of plastic, and they can erode over time. So one of the best things to do is, if you're managing a building, is to do an in-suite inspection of these kinds of hoses. I know it's not going to be easy, but it will prevent floods from occurring in the future. We had a building that we were working with, and they had a flood about once a week for about 6 weeks. And the cause was the same. It was the dishwasher hose that kept eroding, cracking, and it caused a flood. Well, the building took a very proactive approach. They did a suite inspection. They changed any of the damaged hoses, and they haven't had a flood since. So it was good for them. Toilet leaks are also another major cause of flooding inside of condos. One test you should do is you can put a drop of food dye into the top of the tank and see if it goes down to the bottom of the bowl without flushing. If it does, you know that maybe some of the gaskets have been eroded, so it's time maybe to replace the toilet. You're also going to make sure that all the water connections to the hose, from the hose to the toilet, are maintained well and that there's no cracking on them. Balcony and roof leaks. These are very problematic. One is because they're usually associated with a problem with the roof, which means that you can have a problem with a membrane on the roof or the roof structure itself. These are also the most likely situations where you're going to find mold inside of the living space. Whether there's a strong rainfall and the resident in the suite notices that there's water coming in through their ceiling, we'll go in there, cut open the ceiling in order to dry it, and find a lot of mold in there because it has slowly been leaking inside of it. Repairs for this can be as simple as replacing caulking, maybe on a skylight, to as complicated as replacing the entire roof or membrane on top of the roof. Finally, one of the best ways to prevent floods from occurring in living spaces is to make sure that the residents have proper insurance. Although this may not completely prevent a flood, it will make things a lot easier when it comes time to a flood occurring. I've seen personally residents pour things like kitty litter down their drain or cooking grease down the drain, and these inevitably do cause backups that will flood out a living space and cause a lot of damage. So you want to notify the residents not to do these things. Put up notices inside of the building to make sure that your residents are well informed of what they should and should not do inside of their condo or apartment. You're going to want to inform your residents never to leave any sort of water-based appliance running while they're away. So inform your residents not to leave their dishwasher on, not to leave their washing machine on while they're out of the suite. Because if they do flood, it's a lot easier for them to notice it and clean it up quickly if they're in the suite as opposed to if they're gone. Okay, so you've done everything you could possibly do to prevent the flood from happening, but inevitably you do have a flood in your condominium or your hotel that you're managing, and you need to get it cleaned up right away. So what to do in the event of a flood? Well, the first thing you need to do is assess the flood. If you notice anything like electrical cords inside of the water that's flooded out, you're going to want to make sure that the electricity is turned off. Do not enter it if there is electrical cords inside of the water because it could electrocute you. Also, you're going to want to determine what is the source of the water. If it's sewage from a backup or a kitchen stack backup, you do not want to enter that kind of water. It has a lot of bacteria and you can get very sick from just entering that area. The second call you're going to want to make is to your plumber. Make sure that whatever the water source is, it is shut off and there's no more water pouring out into the area. The third call you're going to want to make is to your emergency service company. You could use Spectrum Building Services. Your emergency service company should arrive within about 1 hour after your call to begin the cleanup process. During the cleanup process, the first thing that the emergency service company will do is go in and start documenting everything. So they'll take photos of all the water damage. Then the next thing that they're going to do is extract all the water. So they're going to suck up all the water with an extractor, like you can see in the photo on the right, in order to remove any standing water from the area. The next thing that they're going to do is start to dry any of the wet materials. So this will include the baseboards, the flooring, anything like that. They're going to use commercial air movers to circulate the air and dehumidifiers in order to remove the moisture from the air. So now we'll move on to mold. If you have a flood that's not attended to properly, or if you have a slow leak, most likely you're going to get mold inside of a living space, whether this is a condo or an apartment building. So first we need to know, what is mold? Well, mold is a fungus, and it can grow in an indoor or outdoor environment. The concentration level of the mold is what is either dangerous or not dangerous. There's mold everywhere. There's mold inside of this building right now that we're breathing in. But if it's at a high enough concentration, that's when it can become dangerous. We need 4 things in order to create mold. We need time. First thing mold will need is about 24 hours in order to start the growing process. The second thing that mold will need is temperature. Mold likes to grow between about 18 and 23 degrees, so about room temperature. Mold will also need moisture in order to grow. This can be anything from steam, from steaming food, all the way to a flood that was not attended to properly. And mold will also need a food source. Mold likes to grow on things like baseboards, drywall, flooring, or carpeting. These are all very common things for mold to grow on. So if we think we have mold, how are we going to identify it? Well, we can identify it visually. If you look at these 2 pictures, you can see mold growing on top of drywall. So mold can either be black, blue, white. It typically grows in the top or the bottom of the wall. So what will happen if there's a leak, the water will go down to the bottom of the wall, collect there, then it will start to grow up and push its way out through a wall cavity. The second way that we can identify mold is through the odor. Mold has a particularly musty, earthy smell to it. So if you're smelling something like that that's also in an area that's prone to dampness or moisture, most likely you are smelling mold. Keep in mind that mold typically smells during the reproductive cycle, which means that it's growing. And in order for mold to grow, we know that it needs moisture. So if you smell that earthy, musty smell, most likely you have mold and you also have some sort of water intrusion or a leak. So that should be a red flag to get things going right away because there is a problem. So you need to call in a contractor right away. If you have a resident or somebody who is concerned that they have mold in their unit, but you can't smell it and you can't see it, what we can do is air quality testing. And what we'll do is we'll come in, we will pull out a sample of the air, and we will analyze it. We'll see what is in the air, what types of mold are in the air, what concentration levels, and can provide a report stating what is in the air and what the next steps are to remediate it. So, now that we know that we have mold, what are we going to do to fix it? Well, we need to remove the mold. We can't just use bleach in order to clean it. That just doesn't work. The first thing that we need to do as contractors is come in, we need to make sure that we're protected. So we'll have on the Tyvek suit, which you can see in the photo on the right. We're also going to wear an air mask, which is the picture on the left. That's the cartridge that they use in order to prevent the mold spores from going into the technician's lungs when they start to remove the mold. Setting up a containment chamber is essential for removing mold. We need to make sure that the area that's moldy is enclosed so that way the mold spores don't spread and go to other areas within the living space and start to grow. We also want to prevent the spores from exiting the area and then going into people's lungs from them breathing it in. So what we do is we set up a containment chamber, and I also have one set up over here that I'll be demonstrating later, and I'll show you how it works. Once we've contained the mold within the containment chamber, we need to remove all the moldy materials. So we will begin cutting all of the moldy materials out. Everything has to go, whether it's drywall, baseboards, or flooring, it all needs to be removed. Structural materials also do need to be removed, but they need to be replaced right away in order to secure the building. After we've removed the moldy materials, we spray down the area with a product called Benefact, or it's called a biocide. And what that does is it kills any of the mold that's still remaining there. Now, when you kill mold, it's not like killing a person. It's not the end. They can come back to life. What mold does, it will be dormant, and then it can come back if it's wet again, and we have those 4 elements that create mold. So we need to use a vacuum, actually, to suck up any of the dead mold spores. And that is the picture on the far left. It's a vacuum with a HEPA filter, which can suck out any of the dead mold spores that may be remaining inside of the area. Finally, once we've removed all the mold, we've done our HEPA vacuuming, we need to do clearance air sampling. This is basically testing the air quality in the area where there was mold to make sure that it's all been removed. So what we'll do is we come in, we take some samples of the air, we produce a report. It'll say what kinds of mold are still remaining, if any, and we can provide that to the residents. So just to summarize for mold, we need 4 things in order for mold to grow. We need time, we need temperature, we need moisture, and we need the food source. We can do a visual inspection to see if there's mold, or we can see if we can smell the mold. If you can't do either, then we can do air quality testing to see if there is mold in that area. Once we know that there's mold, we need to remove it. So we'll put on the proper protection, we'll set up the negative air chamber, we'll remove the moldy materials and use the biocide, and then do the follow-up air testing to make sure that everything's safe. So right now I'm going to demonstrate our containment chamber. So if you want to imagine that our Spectrum logo here is mold. So just imagine that. What we need to do is we need to isolate it inside the containment chamber, which we have set up here, pre-built. What we need to do now is turn on the air scrubber in order to remove the moldy spores inside of here and create negative air. So I'll show you how we do that. So as you may or may not be able to hear, the air scrubber is on and it's sucking all the air out and it's pushing it into the room. And as it's doing that, it's also filtering the air so that way the air inside there is clean for the technicians to breathe in. At this point, the technicians would come in, they would cut out all the moldy materials, they would clean everything up, and then they would deconstruct the containment chamber. That's about all that I have for you. Does anybody have any questions about mold or floods, anything related to that? Yeah, her question was, should you do air quality testing before you do a mold remediation? The answer is yes. It's always best to do air quality testing before to see what you're dealing with and see where the regular mold spores in the living area are at. Every living space is going to have different types of mold growing within the space. So you're going to want to make sure you have a baseline in order to kind of bring the levels down to that after the mold remediation is complete.
What is the cost of the mold testing, and does it depend on square footage, or what are the factors?
For us, we do our mold testing at $150 plus tax per sample. The number of samples is going to depend on how big the area is. So if you want, I can come by, drop off a card to you, and if there is something, you can give us a call and we'll come in and take a look at it. Any other questions? How do we determine what is soft content? You mean like what is a porous content? Yeah. Typically what we do is we'll do a visual inspection and we'll kind of determine where it is. If there's visible mold on any sort of porous material, it has to go. If it's invisible, we can do actually air sampling within the porous content to suck it out and see if it's infested enough that we have to remove it. During our air samples, we can actually see if the mold is in the reproductive cycle. So we can see if there's mold growing inside of the porous content. If it is, we'll dispose of it. If it's not, we can usually clean it.